prospective AV person helping us this morning, learning the ropes. So it's a bit of a training session. So,
morning, friends. Good to see all of you here. It's good to be in meeting and to gather in worship in spirit and in truth. Good to see friends online, and thank you for tuning in. And friends online, we do see you, just so you know that we do see you. Doug and John and Michael, good to see all of you. We see that thumbs up there. John, right back at you. Awesome. Great to have you. Great to connect. And Bob, thank you. Thank you for doing that. I was thinking about haikus lately. I asked our AV team, along with Sean, to write a haiku for a movie screen stand that we've had here for years and years, but finally gave up one of its tripod legs and it bent. And this particular movie screen has been challenging to work with the last year or so as we tried to do things in the lounge and downstairs. And so there was a sense of sadness, but also maybe a sense of relief that we no longer have to work with this movie, this screen that we had. And I said, taking a look at this bent leg on the tripod of the movie screen, I said, I took a picture of it and I sent it to Bert and Ryan and Sean, and now I'm sharing it with you, all of you. I said, we should write a haiku, an ode to the service that this screen has done. We will put those haikus in a collection of art that we've put together and compiled, but I've had haikus on my mind, and I flipped open this book, Spirit Rising, Young Quaker Voices, and I flipped it open and it said, the title of this was Quaker Haiku. I thought, oh, this is interesting. And I thought this would be a great call to worship, a Quaker haiku. And let it lead us. Silence envelops, hearts gathering together, waiting to be led. Let's center down, friends, and sit with that. Silence envelops, hearts gathering together, waiting to be led. May this be a preamble for this living moment of worship, living Christ. We turn the eyes of our hearts to your light. We open the ears of our hearts to your spirit. And we open our hands and arms to one another as we see and acknowledge that of God in each and every person here in this space and online. There too is the image of God. For that we are thankful. Spirit, we ask that you would have your way among us. In Christ's name, amen.
the streams of living waters springing from eternal love. Wellspring of thy sons and daughters, and all fear of want remove. Who can faint while such a river ever flows? Their thirst was quenched. Grace which like the Lord the giver never fails from age to age. Round each habitation hovering, see the cloud and fire appear, for a glory and a covering, showing that the Lord is near. Thus deriving from their banner light by night and shade by day, safe they feed upon the manna which He gives them when they pray. Grace to you, grace to you, God's great grace to you. As you walk through your life in joy or in strife, God's grace, God's grace, God's great grace to you. Love to you, love to you, God's great love to you. As you walk through your life in joy or in strife, God's love, God's love, God's great love to you. Peace to you, peace to you, God's great peace to you. As you walk through your life in joy or in strife, God's peace, God's peace, God's great peace to you.
Good morning. I'm Doug Searles, and our scripture reading this morning begins with 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 through 7. Paul writes to Timothy, I remember you constantly in my prayers, night and day. I am longing to see you, for I cannot forget how moved you were when I left you. And to have you with me again would be the greatest possible joy. I often think of that genuine faith of yours, a faith that first appeared in your grandmother Lois, and then in Eunice, your mother, and is now, I am convinced, in you as well. Because of this faith, I now remind you to stir up that inner fire which God gave you at your ordination through my hands. For God has not given us a spirit of cowardice, but a spirit of power and love and a sound mind. Our second reading is from Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Thanks be to God for the reading of God's holy word. I now invite Brendlinger to bring us a word of hope. Irv?
Doug, for reading those inspiring biblical passages. Last week, we were inspired as Daniel shared stories about two women, one from Bible times in Israel and one from contemporary times, 20th century, in our own Portland. As we entered open worship, Daniel invited us to tell our own stories, to be aware of and faithful to our own stories. He invited us to let our stories take flesh, doing simple acts. I sat in open worship and I thought, yes, absolutely, yes. And I reflected on my story and I began to feel a sense of hope. And I thought, if there was ever a time when we needed hope in our violent world, in our chaotic political world, if there was ever a time that we needed hope, that time is now. So yes, we are ready for a word of hope. And that's what I have for us this morning. I'll share with you the word of hope through stories of three of my friends. These are friends from the 18th century. I realize I don't look quite that old. But a major key is that these three men lived ordinary lives. They did ordinary things. And the results, well, I'll let you be the judge of that. But their stories certainly give me hope, and that's why I wanted to share them with you. My first story is about Anthony Benezet. Some of you have heard me talk about Benezet before. He is a major factor in the Brendlingers becoming Quakers. But that's a complete different story of itself. Benezet was an 18th century Quaker, lived from 1713 until 1784. He lived in Philadelphia. He lived at 3rd and Arch, and he was a neighbor of Benjamin Franklin. He was also a very close friend of Dr. Benjamin Rush. How many of you know that name, Benjamin Rush? Some of us know that name. A little aside here. He was the first Surgeon General of our country. He was the personal physician of John Adams, and he was the Surgeon General of the Continental Army. and is also known as the father of American psychiatry. And by the way, he did his medical training at Edinburgh. Not a bad place. He was a member of the Continental Congress, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and at Benezet's death, Benjamin Rush wrote a most moving tribute to this humble Quaker in the form of a dream about Benezet's entry into heaven. It's a very inspiring dream. So back to Benezet. If any person was an ordinary man and who did ordinary things, it is certainly Anthony Benezet. He would never have seen himself as anything but ordinary. The ordinary things he did, he wrote letters. He corresponded with friends on both sides of the Atlantic. He taught school. And because black people, slaves and their children, did not have educational opportunities, he taught them in his home at night. He also started a school for black children. Benezet thoroughly enjoyed learning and reading. He was especially drawn to philosophy, particularly the Enlightenment writers like John Locke, Francis Hutchinson, and the French Montesquieu. His love of learning and his concern for the downtrodden, the slaves, motivated him to write. He related the intellectual principles that he learned from the philosophers to the problem of the downtrodden, the problem of slaves. And this was a full century before our own Civil War. Not many people were writing against slavery. In fact, the Church of England had a plantation in the West Indies that was run by slaves that the Church of England owned. So to write against slavery was not in the norm. That's Benezet's story. It's very ordinary. He wrote letters. He wrote a few tracts. He was a teacher. Ordinary. But he was faithful in the little things. My second story, my second friend, is another person that some of you know about because I've spoken of him before. His name is Granville Sharp. How many of you know that name, Granville Sharp? Shirley knows him. Again, 18th century, but not Philadelphia. Now we're in London. And Sharp lived from 1735 to 1813. So he was a contemporary of Benezet. Granville Sharp was the 12th of 14 children. By the time he was college age, the family had run out of money. So he never received a formal university education. But he was always sensitive to human need. And that part of his story shaped everything that he did. Well, it so happened that Granville's older brother was a physician, and at the end of every working day, he offered free medical help to the poor. One day, a slave by the name of Jonathan Strong, made his way to Dr. Sharp's office. He was a slave who had been flogged nearly to death by his owner and then discarded to die. The prevailing philosophy of slave owning was you worked them to death, and when they were of no longer any value, you discarded them. It's a little bit like driving a car until the wheels fall off and then you junk it. Something that Sean and Dwight and I and Scott would never do. When the wheels fall off, we put them back on. But that was not the philosophy for slave owner. You worked them till they were dead. Well, Jonathan Strong found his way to Dr. Sharp's clinic, Granville's older brother. He was close to death. Dr. Sharp nursed him back to health. Granville enters the picture and worked with his older brother and found a job for Jonathan Strong. The plot thickens. 2 years later, now he's healthy and robust, and guess who sees him? His owner. And sees him now as a viable investment again. So his owner takes him, sells him as a slave, sells him to a plantation owner who placed him in prison to await passage to the West Indies. The slave, Jonathan Strong, turns to his only friend. He gets a note out to Granville Sharp. Sharp appealed to the authority, the Lord Mayor, who released Strong because it's illegal to imprison somebody who has not committed a crime. But unfortunately, as soon as Strong walked out of the courtroom, the slave ship captain was waiting. He physically apprehended Strong and was going to take him to the waiting ship. The idea was, if you can't keep him in prison till the ship goes, we'll keep him in the ship. Granville Sharp was there. Sounds like a documentary drama, doesn't it? Sharp threatened the captain with assault. So he released Strong. But that's not the end of the story. Next, the owner of the slave began to prosecute Sharp for property damage, loss of property. Now, this would go really well on Netflix. So now it becomes even more complex and it becomes even more involved. Sharp's working with some attorneys, and finally they told him, you need to drop this case. The law is not on your side. Sharp reasoned, if the law is not on my side on this issue, there's something wrong with the law. The law needs to be changed. So since his attorneys weren't wanting to represent him anymore, he studied law and constructed his own defense for this slave. He won the case, secured Jonathan Strong's freedom. Well, you can imagine what happened. Granville Sharp's reputation spread among the slave community. So he was called upon to help with similar cases. Now remember, he's not an attorney, but he could assist. He could do the legwork. He could do the research. He continued to win. But unfortunately, all of the victories were on technicalities. Maybe the papers weren't secure. It was the cases were never on the legality of slavery in England. And very interesting, the courts were very intentionally circumventing the core issue of slavery. They didn't want to address that. And so that's what went on for a number of years, a few years, until 1772. Now put that in context. Civil Wars in 1865. This is almost a century before that. 1772, the ideal case came up. All the papers were in order. There were no technicalities on which to win. The issue now was slavery in England, not the West Indies. Slavery in England. The judge did everything he could to avoid the issue. He adjourned the case twice. He tried to drop it, but neither side would back away. Finally, with the evidence of Sharp, provided by Sharp, the judge ruled in favor of the slave. The judge ruled. It became the benchmark case. And from that time, 1772, it was no longer legal to own a slave in England. You could own them in your plantations in the West Indies, but not in England. And it is said that the judge, I believe it was in this case, the judge ruled the heir, England has always prided itself on freedom, hasn't it? The judge ruled, the air in England is too pure for a slave to breathe. Therefore, the moment a slave sets his foot on English soil, the slave is free. The air of England is too pure for a slave to breathe. It's an amazing story, friends. Here's a man, Granville Sharp, not an attorney, not formally educated, but driven by his love and concern for fellow human beings. And think back, it all started when he helped a black fellow get a job. And it developed from there. This is Sharp's story. He did ordinary things. He read, he studied, he wrote, he volunteered his time, and he brought all of his energy to help those who were in desperate need. And by the way, a fun footnote is through these many court cases, Sharp corresponded Anthony Benezet. They never met, but they had a friendship through correspondence. My third story, my third friend, is another person I know well, and that's John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church. Wesley spanned the 18th century, born in 1703 and didn't die until 1791. That's old for the 18th century. Wesley's response to the issue of slavery happened late in his life, when in his early 30s he spent 2 years in Georgia as kind of a missionary, where he witnessed slavery firsthand. He made observations, he treated black people kindly, but he did not register any opposition to slavery as a young man until much later. 34 years later, after he left Georgia, when he was 69 years old, he came on full steam against slavery. He would live another 19 years, and he did everything he could to influence the ending of slavery. He preached against it. He wrote a tract against it. He corresponded with people who opposed slavery. Now, by this time, and this is a crucial factor, by this time, Wesley was very well known throughout England and America, founder of the Methodist Church. The Methodists had become the largest religious group outside of the Church of England. His tract against slavery, entitled Thoughts Upon Slavery, was published in 1774, and it went through 4 editions in its first year. He encouraged his followers to take action. They did. I can give you specific details if you'd like, but the essence is Wesley's followers, through petitions, through influencing their members of Parliament, were a major factor, perhaps the deciding factor, in the parliamentary victory in 1807 to end the slave trade. And then 16 years later, 1833, to end slavery in all their possessions. I don't know if you know this, but it took 5 years. 1733, they passed it in Parliament and made it active in 1738, and the British government compensated the West Indian planters for setting their slaves free. And I've often wondered, if the United States had compensated, maybe we would have avoided a civil war. Who knows? And by the way, Wesley's anti-slavery tract, which clearly influenced his followers, went far beyond Methodism. A copy was sent to Benjamin Rush, who republished it in America, and a copy even ended up in George Washington's library. So Wesley was known. Wesley's very last letter, written only days before his death, was addressed to William Wilberforce. You know that name, the parliamentary leader in England who championed the slavery cause. Days before his death, about 5 days before he died, Wesley wrote Wilberforce. I'm going to read that letter to you. Dear sir, unless the divine power has raised you up as Athanasius against the world, Wesley knew a little church history, I cannot see how you can go through your glorious enterprise in opposing that execrable villainy, which is the scandal of religion, of England, and of human nature. Unless God has raised you up for this very thing, you'll be worn out by the opposition of men and devils. But if God be for you, who can be against you? Are all of them together stronger than God? Oh, be not weary in well-doing. Go on in the name of God and in the power of his might, till even American slavery, the vilest that ever saw the sun, shall vanish away before it. That's Wesley's encouragement to Wilberforce. Well, Wesley was the first Christian leader of world renown to take a stand against slavery. That is significant. His influence was incredible. That's Wesley's story. He wrote letters. He preached. He wrote a pamphlet. He encouraged his people to sign petitions. He was faithful in the little things, in the ordinaries. And by the way, would you like to know what turned the key to Wesley's becoming an advocate for slaves at the age of 69? He came across Benezet's tract. He wrote in his journal, "Today I read an interesting tract by a Quaker." He doesn't even identify who it was, but it was Benezet. And how did it get to Wesley? Granville Sharp. Sharp knew Benezet, Sharp knew Wesley, and thought these two have to be together, so he took the tract to Wesley. So you see why I like this small company of three, Benezet, Sharp, and Wesley. These three fellows, Benezet, Sharp, Wesley, they just did ordinary things, but they changed the world. So I could say it this way: out of the ordinary grew the extraordinary, faithful in little things. There's a poem that captures this that Shirley and I really enjoy. You're probably familiar, but it so aptly describes the little things. There isn't much that I can do, but I can share my bread with you, and I can share my joy with you, and sometimes share a sorrow too, as on our way we go. There isn't much that I can do, but I can sit an hour with you, and I can share a story with you, and sometimes share reverses too, as on our way we go. There isn't much that I can do, but I can share my flowers with you, and I can share my books with you, and sometimes share your burdens too, as on our way we go. There isn't much that I can do, but I can share my songs with you, and I can share my mirth with you, and sometimes come and laugh with you, as on our way we go. There isn't much that I can do, but I can share my hopes with you, and I can share my fears with you, and sometimes shed some tears with you, as on our way we go. There isn't much that I can do, but I can share my friends with you, and I can share my life with you, and oftentimes share a prayer with you, as on our way we go. The beauty of the ordinary. Well, let's begin to wrap this up. Between last Sunday and today, we've heard stories of Ruth by the courage of Ezra, breaking the norms of racial and ethnic evil. The story of Beatrice Morrow Kennedy, who gently, or not so gently, brought people together to address racism. And today, the story of three people who simply did what they could do in loving response to human need, living their lives, living their story of ordinary. And they had an influence far beyond anything they could envision, but what they could hope for. So why am I telling you these stories? Just this: to invite you to look at your story, to see the little things that you do that have a loving impact on others. Perhaps you've never seen what you do in that way. But I'm saying that to give us a sense of hope. In this world of political chaos and violence, when we don't know what we can do, I believe God desires to use us as we are. God desires us to allow our stories to touch our world, to transform it. And that brings us back to Paul's inspiring words. Stir up that inner fire which God gave you. For God has not given us a spirit of cowardice, but a spirit of power and love and a sound mind. My word of hope for us: do the little things, the simple things, the things in your ordinary life in order to live out your story. I've recently been concerned about myself, wondering, what can I do in this present chaos? What can I do? But now I'm beginning to feel some hope. Looking at my story and allowing the little things to take root. Living into my story. May each of us take that seriously. As we enter our time of open worship, I have two queries that we can consider. One, what parts of my story bring me hope? And two, what ordinary things am I doing or can I do that God desires to live? Let's enter a time of open worship.